First, we're going to hear from Michael. He, along with a couple of other people from our branch of the International Socialist Organization, went down to Pittsburgh last week to protest the group of 20, basically to protest the richest 20 countries in the world who are getting together as bankers to discuss how to screw us all over. They've been quite successful this past year, and that's why people went to Pittsburgh to fight that. So I think that's going to set a great tone for this meeting tonight as we talk about how we can win a better world. So, Michael.
All right. Thanks, everyone. It's good to see so many people out here tonight. I even see some college Republicans. That means we must be popular. That's good stuff. So I wanted to we're having a meeting tonight on what socialism is, and I think an event that happened, the protest that Natalia alluded to in Pittsburgh, I think shows the different political time that we're living in as young people, as students and workers, and what's possible in terms of organizing to fight for a set of socialist politics and to fight the capitalist agenda. So the G20, which is, like Natalia said, the G20 is the 20 richest capitalist nations. And G20 summits are when central bank governors, heads of state, Barack Obama was there, and finance ministers get together. And some of it's a talk shop, but it's also trying to figure out policies to basically stabilize international capitalism. And that's what was happening this past week in Pittsburgh. A couple of us from our local branch went down. We marched with a contingent of the International Socialist Organization and with 10,000 other people. So it was a really amazing experience. So the bottom line is the G20 represents the interests of the rich all over the world. And everywhere the G20 goes, it's protested. Last year, I don't know if people saw coverage of the protests that happened in England, but this year it was especially volatile, and it was going to be tough for them to have a summit without some opposition in the context of the meltdown of capitalism internationally, and what we've seen in every single country, the capitalist class creating a crisis and then turning to the working people in each one of these countries and asking the working people to foot the bill. So we saw that here in this country in the form of the trillions of dollars that went to the banks, and in this country in the form of social programs that are being gutted as we speak. So people wanted to go out and protest it in the context of a crisis of the capitalist class, when the capitalist class was trying to make working people internationally pay for it to restore profitability to their system. So that, I think, explains why 10,000 people came out in the first place to Pittsburgh. And I think it's another cruel irony of the G20 to show up to a place like Pittsburgh, basically deindustrialized. It's been ravaged by the very policies that are being promoted by the institution of the G20. So they're vultures with a cruel sense of irony, is the way that I like to put it. So there were 10,000 people there, and I've been to some anti-war marches in Washington. There was the immigrants' rights movement a couple of years ago, which was amazing, but I think this was the most multiracial, young, and working class in composition rally that I've ever been to. And it's also important to note that we don't see 10,000 people march against the institutions of capitalism in this country every day. It's very significant. 10 years ago we had things like the battle in Seattle, the struggle against economic imperialism, things like the IMF and the WTO. But for a while, we lived under George Bush. We lived under the idea that the market was the only thing that could save people. For a while, it was tough to get something like that off. But in Pittsburgh, which is really hard to get to, 10,000 people came out, which was the largest march since the Vietnam War in Pittsburgh. And the capitalist state was also prepared to go out. There were 6,000 armed representatives of the capitalist state there, 4,000 local and state police, and there were 2,000 National Guard. The Secret Service was there. People may have seen some of the videos that went viral on YouTube, but basically there was a week of actions, and on Thursday, the day before we went, cops started lobbing tear gas at people. People may have seen the video on YouTube of an unarmed car pulling up and shoving someone into the vehicle and driving away. And as we speak, comrades in Pittsburgh are trying to organize a free speech fight to free people who are still held in custody by the state in Pittsburgh. So people went out and protested this institution, and the cops were there ready to rob us of our right to free speech. But it was still an amazing event. And I just want to, in the few minutes I have left, outside of the fact that this is significant and the fact that we haven't seen anything like this in this country for a while, just go over some of the components of the march. Like I said, it was young, it was multiracial, and it was fired up. Obviously, I think the slogans from the front at the end of the march. At the end of the march, there were speakers, and some of the things from the front of the march that were getting the most applause were things like, "We can pay for our social programs. What you have to do is tax the rich. Another thing that got huge applause was everyone should go back to their communities and mobilize with their coworkers and the people that they live with on a daily basis to fight for a movement that can fight for a world that puts people before profit. So when I say it's an anti-capitalist march, I'm not saying that just because there were a couple hundred socialists there of various political tendencies. The entire crowd was reacting most strongly to sentiment that was challenging the very essence of the system that we live in itself. And you can see the sort of class anger that exists in this country right now, and I think what's possible in terms of organizing a socialist movement in this country. There's also a lot of times what's referred to as the anti-globalization movement. It gets referred to as looking backwards, or it's really nationalistic, buy American, all those things. But this protest was extremely international, because I think people at the march had a sense that capitalism is an international system, and international solidarity is going to be extremely essential to challenging it. Some of the chants that were taken up were things like, from Mexico to Palestine, border walls are a crime, certain things that people, making connections between the attack on working people here and the attack on working people all over the world. And I also think people that were at the march made the connections between the captains of industry and finance and the masters of war. This wasn't just about, you know, the bread and butter economics per se. It really was a big picture march where people were putting together all the dots about the capitalist system. And really the fact that 10,000 people were in Pittsburgh, the largest protest since the Vietnam War moratorium days, and the fact that the state took it seriously enough to send 6,000 of their thugs to try to take away free speech shows us that it was an extremely important march. It's a sentiment that we can hopefully build on in the coming months and years. And I think for the first time, and I don't want to steal too much of Charles's thunder, but really we need to get together, because I think what Pittsburgh shows us is that for the first time in a while, we can actually build a socialist movement in this country. I mean, Pittsburgh's a Midwestern city. They were going to have it in New York City, and I think they figured it'd be easier to try to have something that wouldn't be as disrupted as much if they held it in Pittsburgh. But people still went out there and protested them. And the lesson that we should take home is that, you know, it's not just around LGBT rights that people want to fight. It's not just around this issue or that issue. I think a lot of young people want to question the basis for the entire system itself, which is the cause of so many ills. So that should really excite us, and I think it should inspire the discussion we have tonight about socialism, what it is, why we need it, and hopefully afterwards we can start to, you know, get together and, you know, dream about more things like what happened in Pittsburgh, because, you know, we need that kind of movement. But I'm going to turn it over to Charles now.
So, I'm not water. Thanks. So thank you for my water, and thanks for an excellent talk. This is a great crowd. Thank you, all of you, so many of you, for coming. The camera can't see the crowd, but just so the camera knows, there are a lot of people out there. It's very exciting. So I want to talk about, I want to start by talking about a presidential campaign of hope. This was a presidential candidate who came from the Midwest, was of humble origins, rose through the ranks of his party to become its presidential candidate. And when he ran for president, he tapped into dissatisfaction with the corporate status quo in Washington, with economic inequality, with the carnage of an imperial war. And this candidate was Eugene Victor Debs, the greatest figure in the history of American socialism. I hear a couple people laughing. How many people thought I was going to say Obama? The camera can't see that, but a bunch of hands went up. This candidate, Eugene Victor Debs, was the greatest figure in the history of American socialism. He got 1 million votes from jail in 1920 as the candidate of the Socialist Party. I mean, they printed up placards and buttons that said, like, vote for prisoner 90673 or something like that. It's pretty inspirational. He was in prison for an anti-war speech given in Canton, Ohio, on the eve of the entry of the United States into the first imperial bloodbath known as, or inter-imperial bloodbath known as World War I. I think it's ironic that, you know, we didn't have free speech for socialism in 1920 in Canton, Ohio. We don't have it today in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the state right next door. It also shows what capitalist society considers a crime, because you look at someone like Richard Nixon, who wound up being president, committed all sorts of terrible